Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long-term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first-of-its-kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the PBSC podcast. It's great to be with you guys. Steve Moore and Mark Castleman coming at you with episode 205 today. It's great to be with you during what is now, when this is being recorded, the holiday season. We hope you're all enjoying relaxing and recharging time with your families as you are getting together and gathering and growing in this process. We've got a whole lot of submissions of late. It's been kind of a deluge here at the podcast.
It really has.
With incoming stuff, which is great. We love that. And we've got a number lined up. But first on the docket is something that we received a couple weeks back, and we're going to read this to you really quickly. It's a good topic because it's one that doesn't get tackled much in recovery circles. It tends to be a little more on the less popular side. Sometimes something that doesn't always get addressed. It's something that probably needs to be addressed less often because it's not usually the biggest set of issues. You'll know what I mean when we start talking about it here in a minute, but it is something that does need to be still talked about because it can cause serious problems and hold the relationship recovery process back for a coupleship when they're going through this. So this is actually a submission from an addict who sent this in, and I'm just going to read this. It's pretty quick, and then we'll jump right in. This is what he says. Hi there. I just want to start by saying thank you for your work in this area of addiction. I'm an addict and I've been in a relationship for the past 4 years. I betrayed my partner several times during that time. I've been to treatment and I've come a long way since those early days in the relationship. I've stopped my damaging behavior and language towards my partner, and I've been showing up for her consistently over the past few months. I feel like I'm doing everything I can for her. I've had to endure a lot of emotional and verbal abuse over the past few years from her, and it's mostly been blamed on my addiction or my behavior. I always believed that if I acted differently things would be different. Now that I feel like I am showing up at my best, I'm really starting to question whether or not my partner is capable of treating me respectfully. I realize that the recovery process takes time and consistency, but the abuse is becoming intolerable for me. I feel like I've continued to be attacked and yelled at. My partner often says or hears things that she doesn't remember saying afterward when she's in a triggered state. One thing I have noticed in this area of recovery is the lack of information regarding what the betrayed partner's responsibility is. I feel like my partner is struggling with taking responsibility for her abuse or her own recovery work. When should an addict walk away? What is the betrayed partner's responsibility in rebuilding a relationship? What should and shouldn't be tolerated in the recovery process? So good topic, because it is a thing that needs to be talked about. And like I said before, it's something that we don't oftentimes address primarily for obvious reasons. It's usually not the biggest fish to fry in the pan, so to speak. But in the recovery process, there are these things that can get in the way. And so I'm glad we're tackling this today. We're going to do our very best to do it in a way that, how would you say it, Mark, that
Well, yeah, that's productive, that's fair, that's balanced,
Yeah.
that's healthy. I think one of the reasons that this topic doesn't come up a lot is there are a lot of people that shy away from it, even people in the professional community, because it can tend to be a place of extreme opposites.
Yeah.
So you've got this guy who's in recovery. He's coming at it from a certain standpoint. We want to really stress, we understand this is all from his standpoint, but he has his position on that. And then you, of course, have all of the partners and spouses who have been betrayed in some extremely severe and unfair and unwarranted and undeserved ways. And they're coming at this from their standpoint. This can become very polarizing. And so we want to, rather than, quote, taking sides, we really want to come from a place where we're talking about what we discuss a lot on PBSC. What does it mean to be authentic in my authentic place? What does it mean to come from a place of collaboration? And we also want to come from a place of the deepest empathy. I mean, I can tell you from my standpoint, after decades of the betrayal that I caused to my spouse, not only there was a time when I would have written in this message, but I can tell you that there was a part of me for a long time that believed I don't have a leg to stand on. I don't even have a voice in all of this. I don't deserve to say a thing.
Yes.
I went from there to when I did get a lot of recovery under my belt and I felt like I was doing a lot of things better. I did have times of frustration and even coming into the place of resentment where I didn't feel like my wife was coming along as in the ways that she should have been, or as soon as she should have been, or that old lingering, betrayals and hurt feelings and so forth seemed to be hanging on a lot longer than my ego brain told me they should have been hanging on.
Yeah.
So it's very, we just have a lot of heartfelt feelings for what this is, and for the addicts and especially for their partners. This is a tough area.
Well, and for partners, I mean, I know we talk about this all the time. So at the sake of being overly repetitive, but I mean, we are so very much mindful of, I mean, even as we're watching, reading through the submission from this addict spouse, we can so connect with where this partner's at with the anger, with the frustration. And again, we have to go off is just his side of the street, right? But if in fact, abusive, verbally abusive behavior is occurring, we can connect with the logic behind that too. It doesn't make it okay, and we're going to talk about that today. But I mean, the pain that spouses go through in this process, and the injustice, and everything we talk about all the time. I mean, as we say so often, no partner listening to this podcast signed up for this. Nobody looks at their partner across from, when they're sitting in their wedding ceremony, looks across the way at their partner and says, "Gosh, I just can't wait till I'm betrayed, till you screw me over, till you lie to me, till you hold things back, you manipulate me, you gaslight me. That's going to be great. I just waited my whole life for that.
Can't wait till you're unfaithful, till you go and have relationships outside of our vows right now. This is going to be so awesome."
Exactly. Right. I mean, all of you spouses, we really do honor you because you're dealing with things that you never signed up for. And so that is incredibly frustrating, and damaging and hurtful and all the things that it is. It is important though to tackle this topic because, and this is just, I'm pulling on a really simple adage I know, and we're going to apply it here to a complex situation in a small way. There is an element to the two wrongs don't make a right component here, right? Where, a spouse is oftentimes, in that place of understandable pain, and they can, and that a very understandable anger and frustration can get away from them. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we jump into that, we do really want to talk to the addicts here who are listening to this as well. So we want to kind of start there, and then we'll kind of work our way over to the partners and then to the coupleship as we wrap up today, if that works for everybody. So first thing, if Mark or we were talking about this before when we were producing this, if a guy were to come into our office and say something like this, and if we both had nickels for every time this happened, we would be quite well off. And a guy came in and said something, along these lines of the following: "Here I am, I'm doing all this stuff, da 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 da. What's her problem? What's her deal?" We would run him through a series of questions, and we're going to run those through to you now, right? So question number one for all the addicts who may find themselves in this place, including the guy who sent this in: how long have you really been safe for her? Right? There's a big difference between starting to work this recovery process and when it actually is working in a way that resonates for your partner. Call it a
Oh,
time
and
gap, call it a time delay, right?
yeah, and I like the word you used to, not only how long, but have you really been safe for her?
Versus what you may think you have.
Right, because guys think, yeah, I've been totally safe for her for this many months. It's like, well,
Yeah.
how do you know you've been totally safe for her these
Yes.
many months? Have you asked her what it means for you to be safe? How much
Mm-hmm.
input and feedback have you been getting from her on a regular, really almost daily basis about what it means for her to feel safe, to be safe?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there are other questions kind of tied in that same vein. How long have you really been consistent? Now, this one I want to speak to because this is totally the question that Steve got hit up by his therapist, and rightfully so. When we, I'll just own it. I had a brain when I was in addiction mode that was legendary for filtering out the blips in my recovery and only focusing on the good parts. Right. I've
Yeah.
been doing all these things right. And as my therapist pointed out to me, well, yeah, Steve, but what about 2 weeks ago when you completely lost your shit and went off the rails? Well, yeah, but, and I'd immediately jump into that. And what he had to help me understand, and what I'm going to convey to you all, is for a spouse who's trying to cultivate safety, given a dynamic of a long pattern of betrayal, guys, when we have that quote unquote real quick slip up with that, guess what it does to your partner? You may look at it as a real quick blip. That may be a square one reset for her in the safety category. So if you are, getting better at this, if you don't have the consistency to back that up, guess what's going to happen to your partner's defenses? A partner's defenses, if you were an army and you were fighting another army, and the other army said, hey, you shouldn't have as many guard towers set up because we only attack you once every like 2 weeks. Why do you have all these guard towers up? I mean, we used to attack you every day. Now it's only like every other week. I don't know what your problem. Like, you got to bring the defenses down. Do you think that you would listen to that? Of course not. You might even put a few more snipers up there because now you don't trust them even more. Right? If you're going to create a safety based situation where you want to see that authentic connecting side of your partner come out, we have to create that environment. And if you're not being consistent, it's not to say we're condemning you, because if you're making progress, mazel tov, and that is awesome. But if you don't have the consistency to back it up, chances are you are seeing that progress very differently from how your partner is.
Well, and I love you brought up, Steve, what we consider as addicts to be a little blip or a slip, or we just temporarily go back into old behaviors. What's the big deal? You have to remember this is years or decades in the making for your partner with
Yes.
regard to betrayal and all of these feelings. And so one little thing can trigger the floodgates to come pouring back. We think it's tiny, but for a partner, it's not.
It is
And
not.
you know what? I'm even going to say that it shouldn't be. As a
Yeah.
partner is trying to establish her place of safety, her place of authenticity, she needs to carefully look at what would be considered healthy and normal and not with regard to her reactions to
Mm-hmm.
various things. Based on the history, her major survival and self-protection mechanisms are on high alert, and they should be on high alert. And so we don't want any partners listening to say, well, yeah, he had a little slip up and man, I just lost it. That doesn't mean, partners, that there's something wrong with you. It means it's very reflective of what's gone on, the depth of what's happened, and for how long it happened. Your reactive response to what could be called, a small slip is very understandable and, in fact, important, right? What do we talk about, Steve? Verifying the verifiable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trusting in little ways that you can, but not letting down your guard. And so there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this kind of ties into that, consistent in your recovery. And obviously it ties into the emotional reactivity, right? Now, something that we want to say with these series of questions that we're asking while you addicts are thinking about this is that other side that Mark had said at the beginning, and we want to reemphasize it. How do you know? Have you actually asked? Again, I'm going to put myself embarrassingly on the chopping block here. I can't tell you how many times I set off in recovery in one way, shape, or form to do something that was really good. It wasn't like it was bad. It was good recovery work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I attached an anticipated outcome on the part of my partner that I had not talked to her about. Right. I mean, Mark and I, we would just chuckle because I mean, I think back to times where, I mean, I'm working with some guys right now where this exact thing happens where, and this kind of brings up the next piece, right? Recovery is an exact science. Are you seeing any growth at all? Because in this message from this guy, and we hear this from a lot of guys, he's saying, I'm just not seeing any change. And that would be one of the questions to ask. Are you really not seeing any change? Or are you maybe not seeing change in the areas that you're wanting to see it? Right.
Yes.
Because, like, for
Yes.
example, I'm working with a guy right now where this is an issue. His wife is definitely responding and is growing in her recovery. What he had as an idea of what was going to happen first in her recovery process is very different from his. He's been working a good recovery. He's been providing safety. She's been working on her recovery. Guess what he anticipated would happen? The walls would come down. Sexually, they'd come back online again. We're going to sing Kumbaya. We're riding off into the sunset. Steve's got our back. And you know what she's doing? She's getting really good at having boundaries for the first time.
Mm.
So she's growing in her recovery, but guess how he feels? Oh, she's not growing. If anything, she's regressing. She's not
Yep.
more sexually open. She's more sexually closed off. Now she's got all these boundaries, right? And so
Yep.
you have to be really honest with yourself about, is growth really not happening? Or are we just looking selectively to the areas in which we want to see change and we're not seeing that change?
Well, and I'll tell you another thing that happened for me. I would get all excited about, for example, 5 key areas that I was working in my recovery and my personal growth. And I was crazy excited about the progress I was making. And then I wasn't sensing this rah-rah cheerleader enthusiasm from my wife about those 5 things. And when I finally, dared to, put down my, I got this all figured out, kind of thing, and went to her and said, so here's what I've been doing in these areas. What do you think? And I was shocked because she said, those are all good, but there's 2 other key areas that are super important to me that you haven't addressed at all.
Yep.
And
Absolutely right
I was
on
like a
point.
deer in the headlights. Like, what? Well, you could have asked.
Yeah.
Could have got my feedback and my input about what I would like you to work on most in order for me to feel safe and reestablish this relationship and help with my healing. Your 5 things are great, but they weren't my top priorities.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see a common thread here in this first piece, guys, right? A little bit of communication in these areas goes a long way.
Oh, yeah, it does.
And we know it's volatile, especially at the early stages. And if you've got to involve a therapist, use alternate means like email or text to maybe start these conversations. We talked about that last week in the podcast. Those are all fine methodologies, but in some way, shape, or form, you've got to get that ball rolling so that people are on the same page in terms of here are my needs, here's what I can give, here's what I can't. We'll talk more about that as we wrap up the podcast here in a couple minutes, but we did want to just start off on that piece and a few other things to keep in mind, okay, for the addicts here in the room. Just like it took your relationship, I think for most of you in pretty much all cases, if not the vast majority, probably did not start off in this really combative, defended place, right? It started, again, nobody heads to the marriage, vow ceremony saying, gosh, this is just awesome. We fight every day, constant contention. Nobody likes anybody. I am signing up for an eternity of this, man. This is
Right.
good to go.
Right.
Right. We start off in a really good place and then things regress. And everyone's story is different, but that usually is learned over an extended period of time. Not only that, but when we enter into a relationship, both addicts and partners come in with a whole set of patterns, both positive and negatives, of ways of handling things that they learned way before this relationship ever began. And so when just like a partner in many cases learned negative communication styles, negative patterns of addressing issues over a series of extended period of time, both with you in the relationship as well as from other sources, it's important to recognize that change may also take time. And not to put too fine a point on it, guys, but kind of like it took us a little bit of time to maybe start addressing our addiction in a way that was,
and is still taking us time.
And is still taking us time to change, right? And I know that we're saying that delicately because we don't want to crap on your recovery or tell you what because I'm sure you're all doing great things. The fact you're listening to a podcast about this speaks volume about at least your desire to make change. But it's very easy for us to fall in that trap of just, we get 2 months of sobriety under our belt. We're just like, what the hell? Why are we like back to like the good old days? Where's the honeymoon stage? Where'd that go? And most
Mhm.
spouses, when we have them in our office, I've actually had spouses look at their husband when that's been expressed and looked right back at them and said, I don't know. Where have my last 14 years gone? I don't know. You tell me. You tell me, Jim. Where have the last 14 years gone? They're gone. I don't know. Right.
Mhm.
And it's not that this is a tit for tat, right? This is not a quid pro quo situation. Trauma's in the eye of the beholder. Everyone's recovery track's different. We're not saying that one bad behavior on one part gives credit to the other one to do the same thing, but it is to demonstrate that idea that, yeah, if you're finding yourself questioning, should I be patient with my partner in this scenario or not, outside of abusive behavior, which is not okay, I would say in most cases the default would be to start on the patient side and work from there.
Well, and there's another aspect of this that I don't know the details about this guy, but I'll tell you a place that was super hard for me that years into recovery, my wife came to me and finally expressed it. She said, she said, I saw you doing recovery and I saw you doing some really good things, but I never felt that you understood the gravity and the depth of the damage you had done.
Yeah.
She said, I never felt that you really got that you really felt it, deep in your soul, what you had done. And so what she was saying was she never felt that I really was at this deep place of feeling and having empathy for her and with her. Right? Was I really getting down and sitting with her in her pain? Was I really acknowledging it? Was I acknowledging clearly the damage I had done and owning it? And I had to learn how to do that. Steve, it's a process you've taught for many years with your clients, and I do it also. But this place, if I've got a wife who's raging and she's going off the handle, what am I going to do now if I'm going to be in a place of true heartfelt empathy? I'm as hard as it is in that moment, I'm going to lean in and I'm going to get into a space where I can try to feel what she's feeling. And then I can express true feeling, true empathy about it. I am so sorry that I created the situation that has brought these feelings to you. Yeah. No partner, no wife deserves to have gone through that. And I own that. I'm so sorry that I've created this scenario for you. What can I do today to try to help to make things just a little better for you?
Yeah.
How many partners have we had to express that they don't feel they're getting that from their addict partner?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very valid question. And even taking that a step further, guys, have you taken responsibility? Have you started the amends process with your partner? Gosh, it's really scary with how many of my clients that I work with who've even done recovery for a long time. And I'll go through and they're well acquainted with 12 step and they're well acquainted with step 8 and step 9 of making amends to those you've injured. But somehow like the spouse gets skipped.
True.
They've made amends to their old affair partners. They've made amends to, the store that they stole from during that last job. They've made amends, but like it's somewhere along the line, I think sometimes we just think, oh, well, I'm doing all this work, so it's just sort of implied. No, it's not implied.
Yeah, my recovery works amends automatically.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm getting better. I mean, isn't that what no, that's a restoration of you back to an optimal functioning state. And that is what she's looking for as well. But an amends is where we try to take responsibility for and do something to compensate as much as realistically as feasible, knowing that we can't in full, for the damage that we've done.
Right.
Right. And so that needs to be a discussion that's had. Right.
Absolutely.
And then we've already kind of talked about, the need to actually ask. We kind of covered that. The last thing that we would probably say to you guys is before we switch over to spouses here, because our time is flying, is, and this is, we really like this language. We use this a lot in our Dare to Connect program for addict spouses and couples. We talk a lot about pursuing your partner. Are you pursuing your partner in a way that resonates for her?
Yeah. Are you pursuing your partner in a way that resonates for her? That's a very important distinction.
Your recovery is separate from her recovery, which is also separate from the both of you recovery. And you need to keep those separate and be having separate discussions about each of those. Okay. You may be making leaps and bounds of improvement and recovery for you. And that, again, we're not diminishing that at all. But it's really important that we're not assigning outcomes to the work that we're doing in a way that automatically assumes it's going to have X, Y, or Z impact on a partner. Are we doing that in a way that's going to also resonate for them as well? Create
Right.
safety, all of those things.
Right.
So, all right.
And if we could, so we could talk to addicts, this whole time, but as we finish up, we don't want to neglect the partners in all of this. And you said something, Steve, as we were producing this today, and I loved what you said. You said a partner's anger, betrayal, frustration, right? All the intense emotions that she's going through and that she's expressing, that's not the problem. All of that is entirely understandable and reasonable and legitimate and should not be minimized or criticized or dismissed in any way. That's all legit. It's how is all of that? How is she manifesting that? How is she expressing all of that and communicating all of that? That is usually where the problem comes. Not that
Yes.
she's feeling all of that, but how is it now manifesting in her life, in their relationship? How is it coming out? That's where we run into the great challenges. And
Yeah.
the reason that's such an important topic to me is I have so many women that I've worked with and with my own wife, where when I see these powerful, intense, very legitimate emotions coming out, when I find that they don't have the healing and the skills to express those in healthy ways, that it's all robbing them of their own authenticity. It
Mhm.
robs them of their showing up in their higher best selves that they desire to be. And they're kind of losing all that, right? In the reaction of the feelings. And that's why we work so hard with partners on this. We want you to be your authentic, true self that you desire to be. We want you to feel empowered as opposed to reactive and controlled. And we want you into this powerful place where you're being you.
Yeah. This was a huge focus last month on with our partners as we were going through a 2-month series on betrayal trauma in Dare to
Yeah.
Connect. We spent actually, I think, a solid couple of hours going into this. By the way, we would love to have you come join that program if you're liking deep dives on these kinds of topics. Dare to Connect is the place to do them. If a 20 to 30-minute podcast isn't a doing for you once a week, please come join us. We'd love to have you come try a 2-week free trial at daretoconnectnow.com. Come join us. We'd love to have you there. But when it comes to this process, right, of how do we actually do this in a way that allows for authenticity, it is absolutely critical that a spouse be very self-aware, right, and do the work to figure out what are my intended goals in this relationship, right? Am I wanting to reconcile? If so, what needs to happen? Not just on his side, but on my side. What am I needing to see? And are the ways in which I'm showing up on my side conducive to that?
Yes.
Now, again, we want to be really careful with that because these feelings that Mark just mentioned, like he said, the feelings themselves are not only valid, but in many ways they're necessary, right? You should be in a defensive posture following betrayal. Not a that is not only not a bad thing. I would argue it's actually a really good thing, right? That trauma response is there to protect you and to keep you safe from ongoing harm. At the same time, oftentimes how trauma or how anger can manifest will rob, as Mark said, us of our own authenticity. So I'm working with a wife right now. I can give you a real time example who, when she becomes escalated, she works in a profession. I won't say which, but she works in a profession where it does involve a lot of conflict resolution, and she has really good skill sets in that, but she also knows how to do it in a really hurtful way as well, for lack of a better term. And nobody knows how to push our buttons like our spouse does, right? And when she gets amped up and angry, that's when the name calling comes out for her. That's when the personal attacks come out for her. And it's interesting to work with her one on one and him one on one, because when I meet with her alone and she's back in that authentic state, she feels a lot of shame and a lot of regret for those actions.
Mm.
Partially because she doesn't want to be treating her husband that way. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I like the fact that she feels remorse for that, even more so for the following reason. Because just like what Mark said, that's not me. I don't like who I am when I get in that place. And it's also not what the relationship I want to have with this guy. I don't want to be yelling and screaming at him for the rest of time and him shutting down or getting aggressive back. I don't want that. Right? I want us to be happy. I want us to be loving. I want us to be, in this healthy place. So we're spending a lot of time right now working on what we're talking about here. It's learning how to manifest those feelings in a way that not only gives the best opportunity for the addict to be receptive to those hard feelings, but also doing it in a way, frankly, that holds him more accountable. Mark and I talk about this often. I would have so much in the day back in the day rather had Brittany just yell and scream at me. It was so much better when she would just be livid and ticked off, because in some ways it let me off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you compared it to this more vulnerable approach, when I would hurt Brittany's feelings or misstep in some way, and she would say, Steve, I love you, and because I love you, it's important that you know exactly how you're impacting me by this recent relapse. And then she would go through the list. I feel less hopeful that we can even make it. Right. My desire to want to connect with you sexually goes down, not because I find you less attractive, but because I find you less desirable as a partner. Um, I don't feel like I can be safe in your embrace when you're doing these things, right? When she would engage in that vulnerable dialogue, that's like a vampire, just like I felt like somebody was ripping the shades open on the sun. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, this is so much worse, right? Because what that was doing was it was truly holding me accountable,
Just putting
far
her.
more so than
Yep.
name calling or personal attacks ever would.
Abs, I totally agree. Same thing for me. Same thing for me.
Right. And
And
so,
this kind of leads in, to the final part of this as we close up.
yes,
What this really means is, are you willing? Are you open? Are you wanting as a coupleship to start to learn what do healthy communication boundaries look like?
Mhm.
Right? There's got to be a basic baseline with regard to how we communicate with each other. Otherwise, if you decide that you're not willing because of what's gone on in the past or wherever you're at today, that you really just don't want to even work on healthy communication boundaries together, then you probably should just stop trying to resolve these issues.
Absolutely. And we know that that's strong language, but it's very true, because without, and again, we're not saying this with a lack of sensitivity. We know that your relationships have been through a tremendous amount, but like we started this podcast, two wrongs are just never going to make it right. Regardless of the background, there is no place in a healthy relationship going forward for abuse of any kind. They can't coexist. You cannot have health and safety and connection and abuse. Okay. And there are lots of good sources on how to talk about that. We've done extensive podcasts on healthy communication styles and healthy boundaries. In fact, we would like to reference you to one. Okay. Episode 168, titled How a Lifetime of Communication Trauma Can Prevent Healthy Connection in the Here and Now, is a great podcast episodes of ours that we'd recommend that you go to. There are others that we've done because we probably touch on this topic every other podcast in some form or fashion. But that one is like a real deep dive into that process. And again, that doesn't, we, to all you spouses out there, that doesn't mean that we're asking you to just set aside the past and sing kumbaya. We're not telling you to minimize your pain. We're telling you the opposite. We're telling you that we and D2C is a great place to do this. Here's another plug for that. We work with spouses to do the opposite of that, not to subliminate their pain, not to shove it down, but how to express it in a way that actually can facilitate change.
Exactly.
That's the key.
Yep.
Okay.
Expressing your pain in a way that will get you where you really want to go.
The pain and the anger, those are not the problem. It's how they're showing up in the room. That is what's robbing everybody in the room. Okay. So anyway, there's lots more we could say about that, but we're now at 32 minutes, so we better run.
Yeah, we better go.
As always, we love and care about you guys. Thank you so much for attending and being here with us each week. We appreciate the submissions. We hope that you'll continue to send more to us. If you have a question you'd like addressed briefly on the podcast, please do send that in to pbsepodcast.com. And as always, we would love to have you come and join us at Dare to Connect. Wherever you're at in your own recovery, Dare to Connect's been going for 2.5 years now. We are releasing about 33% additional content and resources, as if there wasn't enough on there already. Here in a couple of months, we're excited to say more about that as time allows. we'll address that another day. But please come and check us out at daretoconnectnow.com. Wherever you at in your recovery, I know it sounds cocky, but it is true. We can take you to a better place. We'd love to have you there. So daretoconnectnow.com. And have a great rest of your day, guys. And we will catch you in the next episode. Everything expressed on the PBSC podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.